What's up guys, Phoenix here. This video is going to be another YGOpro duel video, and this time it is going to be a matchup between Metalfoes and Burning Abyss Phantom Knights, or if you prefer the name PK Fire, that's your own prerogative, you can go for it. I personally don't. That's just my own personal preference. I prefer, Phantom Knight, Burning Abyss, Phantom Knights, something like that. It's a little bit more descriptive. But anyway, I'm playing with this Metalfoes deck, and yes, it is 44 cards, because I wanted to play Pod Desires, and there's an upstart in here, and before you start raging, it's like, such a scrub, 44 cards with upstart. There's actually very solid logic behind it. It means it effectively allows you to play a card count that is less than 44 in the form of it's a 43 card deck on the truest essence of paper, but it is a blank card for you to banish off Pot of Desires, and if you do draw it, you're just playing a 43 card deck, so your deck count is lessened by 1, so inherently making it more consistent, even though you are over 40. But it being in the deck as a blank to be potentially banished off Pot of Desires increases your deck size, which thus lowers the percentages of you banishing certain key cards, especially key cards in multiples, with your Pot of Desires. Now, the reason I chose 44 is incredibly subjective. It's because DEVpro arranges them. Once you go over 40 cards, it goes into rows of 11. So that's the only reason it's 44 cards. Like, it could be 42, it could be 43. It could be 45 or 46, but at that point, like, literally, I'm very OCD, and I like it to be very, like, contained within its box. So literally, all of my decks currently that are, like, going over 40 are literally either 44 or 48, because that's the next even counterpart, because once you go over 44, if I drug a card right here, it becomes rows of 12. So, like, you have 3 extra slots. But anyway, these cards are just cards I'm considering. These were in the deck at one point, but I've swapped them. I've since swapped these out for the Scout Monolith package to go into Cyber Dragon Infinity. I might just swap these back in, ultimately, because this card is searchable off Summoner's Art, but, like, it rarely ever works out. It is a 2-card combo, and when you're banishing, like, one-ofs off of Desires, it sometimes doesn't work that well. This probably works really well in a deck that doesn't have Desires in it, but Desires is really strong, specifically in this kind of deck, because you have so many multiples. You basically just always banish, you always just set your fusion first, and then you play Pot of Desires and just get extra cards. Like, it's very simple, it's very easy, and I think this card is incredibly worth. Like, this just gives you extra cards, and that's something you need when you're playing a deck like this, essentially, because it's not as consistent and not as powerful as other Pendulum variants, but you just have such a huge ensemble of things that you just have access to that actually just allows you to like, play potentially better games than with other Pendulum variants, even though the scales in general are, in the purest essence, they are strictly worse. But anyway, that's enough talking about this deck. It's, just 44 cards. I've been liking it. I've been liking how it's been playing, stuff like that. Let's just jump into the game, shall we? Alright, so going into the game, I lose rock, paper, scissors, which means, unfortunately, I'm going to be playing second. Now, this can be mitigated off of, Arch-Phoenix-centric, Pot of Desires, different things like this. And fortunately, I do draw Pot of Desires as well as Arch-Phoenix-centric, meaning effectively going second, I can be playing with effectively 7 cards to his 5, depending on how his turn gets sequenced and how I sequence my plays, and Arch-Phoenix-centric can be an out to any back row that is an anti-spell. But he starts his turn really strong with an Allure of Darkness banishing Farfa, then he specials Alec from his hand, normal summons Graph, overlays into Dante, and mills 3 cards, and off of those 3 cards, one of the cards that he mills is a Seer. So he gets to trigger Graph and Seer, which is amazing. It's just incredibly good. And so he gets to make another Dante, milled Terra Top, Solemn Strike, and Seer. And so he gets to make another Dante with the Graph that just got brought back and a Scarm that just got summoned out of deck, and he mills 3 more cards, milling the Scarm off, detaching the Scarm off the Dante, and then milling double Twin Twister and another Solemn Strike. And then he discards a Calcab from his hand to put Beatrice on top of one Dante, and then discards a second Farfa out of his hand to put a Beatrice on top of second Dante, and then sets 1 card and ends his turn. So he minuses himself a bit to go into Beatrice's, but that's ultimately fine because in the end phase, he gets a Scarm Search for Tour Guide. He gets to do, some very, very powerful things next turn. That back row could be something incredibly relevant, and then also Beatrice itself is very good disruption. So I just start my turn with Arch-Phoenix-centric in the scale as soon as it gets to main phase 1 because it wasn't anti-spell, so I'm like, alright, we're going to go ahead and deal with this. Turns out to be a bluffed Rhoda, which is unfortunate. I could have definitely saved that Arch-Phoenix-centric and done something with it, but ultimately, in terms of, like, my play string, I could have easily, pendulumed Kieran and Arch-Phoenix-centric and then recycled Arch-Phoenix-centric for the rest of the game as a recyclable MST. Now here, I do make a mistake. I make a very, very big mistake, in fact, and it's what causes me the game. Those mistakes seem to be something that have taken place a lot more recently than they have in the past. Especially since I'm playing against my friend who's very, very good at punishing me for making mistakes. And that is that I had Painful Decision in my hand, and I didn't actually register that I didn't have a high scale in my hand. until after I played the Painful Decision, and I banished 2 Stealins off the Pot of Desires. And the rest of the Painful Decision was fine. It was like 2 Volflame, 1 Summoner's Art, 2 Stealin, which was the only problematic part, and 1 combination when I already had 1 in my hand. The fusion is set, it's literally like 1 instant fusion, like a bunch of cards that didn't really matter because there were multiples of. And then like Cliffort Monolith, which doesn't matter anyway, because it's just like part of a cool combo if you get to it. But ultimately, because I didn't Painful Decision for Stealin, which is the only card that you can get off of Painful Decision that's a high scale in the Metalfoes deck currently, I ended up screwing up because I banished 2 Stealins, which the probability for is still relatively incredibly low. So it's not even like we can be results oriented and say, oh, well, you did this wrong and so you deserve to get punished for it. It's like, nah, I mean, I do deserve to get punished for it. It's very hard to play with Pot of Desires. You have to play it correctly, and I just didn't play it correctly. But so this loss was my fault, and by no means Desires. I'm gonna see a lot of people, and I've been seeing a lot of people that are rushing to conclusions of like Desires being terrible, because of the fact that like you banish certain cards and they're being incredibly results oriented in this in their like justifications for these situations, when ultimately like it's ultimately down to whether or not you sequence your plays correctly in 9 out of 10 situations, and I just didn't sequence my plays correctly here because I saw the Archphoenix Centric and registered that as a high scale, and then didn't register in my mind that I was literally throwing it away to pop the back row before I Pot of Desires. So there's that. So I could have definitely easily changed the outcome of this entire game. But anyway, so like I end up Painful Decisioning into my low scale just to get more cards in my hand. I end up making an Automate using the Kieran that I draw off of the Desires, the second Kieran. And then trying to shuffle the Metalfoes Fusion back into my deck to draw a card to try and hand correct, maybe sack my way into a Summoner's Art or a Volflame, because there are still 3 copies of a high scale in my deck. There's 2 Summoner's Arts that are still there, and 1 copy of Volflame, because 2 got banished off Desires, and 1 Summoner's Art got banished off Desires. So there's still some decent probability of me drawing into one, especially since my deck is only 22 cards at that point, once the Fusion shuffles itself back in. So overall, I'm trying to dig for something. I do get a high scale, but it's not the right high scale. I get Luster, which is cool because it allows me to like deck thin, in terms of like getting another silvered. But overall, like it didn't end up working out in my favor. I get to Pendulum Summon the Archphoenix Centric. I get to Pendulum the 2 Metalfoes that got put in my extra deck. And at this point, I'm like, all right, I'm gonna use Archphoenix Centric to pop a Beatrice. It's gonna trigger and float into Pilgrim Dante, obviously. He's gonna trigger all his effects. At this point, I'm in a really losing situation, so the only way I can like try to do anything here is to power through his board naturally. And so like the play is to use Metalfoes Fusion to make Ori Hulk with the 2 Pendulum monsters that I summoned, and then go suicide the Ori Hulk into his Pilgrim Dante, and then use that to kill his second Beatrice if he doesn't have access to another Farfa, because he already used Seer here. So if he plays only 2 Farfa in his deck, he doesn't have access to one. So that's what I was banking on. But he ultimately does have access to a 3rd Farfa still in his deck. So I'm like, all right, I can respect that. I had to take the bank on. I had to literally like try and see if I could maybe squeeze this one out, but it just ultimately doesn't work in my favor because he's playing triple Farfa, which I do believe to be a staple. I like triple Farfa every time I'm playing the Burning Abyss Phantom Knight deck or any Burning Abyss variant because it's so powerful off of Beatrice. In fact, some of my builds play like 3 Farfa and 2 to 3 Alec because like that's another card that's really good at disruption. But he adds back a Scarm off of a Dante that he attached off the second Beatrice that he used, and he meant to use Scarm in the end phase to draw off Pilgrim Dante, because in his hand he has a Seer that he added back, plus Tour Guide, and then just 1 random card that he just drew for turn. So his hand was Tour Guide, Seer that had been used that turn, and then Scarm that hadn't been used. And so it would have been really strong for him if he had been able to, discard it off Pilgrim Dante, but he just wasn't holding down A. He didn't press A quick enough to hold it down and have it set to actuate in my end phase to allow him to discard Scarm, draw a card, and then get a search. But it still doesn't really matter because he's really far ahead of me in terms of cards, because he does get to summon Tour Guide, and he goes Tour Guide into Leviair, into Calcab to bounce to attempt to bounce my my combination, and just do a bunch of cool stuff. Basically, just a bunch of cool stuff. So he targets my combination with Calcab, and Calcab, the card has to remain set as a set target for it to be bounced to the hand. So I just flip it face up, and I'm like, if I get to a next turn and my scale survives, I'm able to use the silver to pop the combination, search for my Volflame, and then I get to use Luster to pop silvered, and put Volflame in the scale, and then Volflame will pop the Luster, and I'll be able to put silvered Volflame in my scale and have access to Ignister and Kieran. So I'm planning on my next turn, but I'm pretty sure I just don't get one at this point because he gets to go into a nice sequence of plays. He overlays his Levier and his Dante into an F0. He makes a Break Sword with 2 Phantom Knights that he's gotten access to, and then he goes into Break Sword, pops my Scale, leaving the combination and the Luster up, and then he goes into Dark Rebellion, and Dark Rebellion sucks up half of Ori Hulk, so Dark Rebellion's at 39, meaning that it can guaranteed punch over Ori Hulk for 25, and then he's got F0 as well, plus 2 other monsters that are over 5,000 attack, so it's just game right here. He makes a slight mistake in terms of what he attacks with. He just attacks with the Beatrice into the Automat, but it's fine, it's still game either way. And when he realizes that he made this misclick mistake, he activates Beatrice's effect and sends Barbar to grave, and burns me for 900, which still ends up being game. It turns out he just doesn't have another Pilgrim Dante in his extra deck or something, because he just didn't summon off Beatrice. And so, or no, it's he can't summon off of it because of the fact that he used Break Sword's effect. He can't summon light monsters, and Virgil, Dante Pilgrim, and Dante Traveler are all light monsters, so he can't summon anything off the Beatrice. But it still doesn't matter anyway, because he attacks with F0 into my Ori Hulk, takes it, and then attacks me with Ori Hulk, Dante Pilgrim, and Dark Rebellion for game anyway. So he ended up salvaging it because of the fact that, you know, Barbar can do that sort of nonsense for you and actually just allow you to save the game there, because even if he had been able to just put me at any range of life that was under 1,000, he's able to Barbar me at any point in the game. And so yeah, that was my mistake, not playing the Painful Decision first, and that's 100% what lost me the game. Most definitely was not the Pot of Desires, but I'm going to see people that are going to try and justify that as the reason, because I did end up banishing 2 Stealins, but that's incredibly anecdotal evidence, and it's not the proper way to justify whether a card is good or not. I believe personally that Pot of Desires is really good. I've never had to rethink my knowledge of a Yu-Gi-Oh! Like interaction or card as much as I have since Pot of Desires has been out and legal. The card, personally for me, has been incredible, and I've been loving everything that happens with the card in terms of interactions and all sort of nonsense. But ultimately, there are going to be players that just don't understand how they need to change the way they play, or change the way they deck build to support the card, or just change the way they sequence their plays, things like that. But ultimately, that's it for this video. As always, guys, thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe to all the nonsense you usually do. Links are in the description to my Facebook pages, as well as a link to background music playlists, and I think Twitch links and stuff like that. There's a bunch of links in the description if you want to connect with me, chat with me, and go to other sources and stuff. That is what they are there for. If you have any specific decks you'd like to see played, or any matchups you'd like to see played, since I am playing with my friend and we can control the matchups that get played in certain videos, then definitely comment those down below. If you want to see specific decks or specific matchups be played against each other, then that's definitely something that we would be more than welcome to do, ultimately, because I am playing against my friend, and like I said, we can control what we play overall. But other than that, that's basically just it for this video. As always, guys, thanks for watching. If you know some people that might like my content, definitely give it, a like, first of all, if you liked it yourself, and then if you think you have any other people you know that might like my content as well, definitely share it around. I'm trying to grow the community of my subscriber base, trying to grow my viewer base, trying to grow my influence of where I reach and stuff, and be able to justify more and better content in the future, because right now, until I get my numbers a little bit up in terms of, watchers, all that, like, there's definitely not a lot of time I can justify throwing into this, even though I do put a lot of time into it already. There's definitely more I could put into it, but it has to be justifiable. And if it can be justified through ever-growing, channel progress, then I will start doing those things. And this was one of the steps I wanted to take. I wanted to, make actual, very well and contained duel videos like this that are single games, 2-match style videos. Depending on, what kind of time constraint I'm after, and ultimately just have, some games be played, and some choice commentary of actually, analytical discussion and stuff like that, talking about the game, rather than just doing bumbling live commentary, although that's sometimes fun as well. That's sometimes fun and good in its own way, but it's very few and far between when, I just decide to, change back and forth, because I really want something ideally in between those. But anyway, long outro over. As always, guys, thanks for watching, as per usual, and take care.